Soon we're going to start SQL and be writing some script in Access. And I wanted to show you how to do that with some existing script and explain a little bit about it. If you take a look at the beginning of each of the chapters, you're going to see some data files in available formats. There's 3 data files here. The author provides us Access, Oracle, MS SQL, and MySQL for formats. And if I take a look at these data files, you will see there's 4 files for every data file there and for each of the different formats. So this one with the MDB extension will be open up the Microsoft Access database with the data already in this. Here's MySQL, here's Oracle, and there is SQL Server. And normally in SQL Server, you're not going to have a .txt extension. The script is text, just like source code usually is, but it will have an SQL extension for SQL Server. I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and here is the script. And let me show you first, if we were doing this in SQL Server, how you would do this. So SQL Server database has an interface that's called SQL Server Management Studio. And the server actually runs in the background, but this allows me to interface with the server. And the name of the server is SQL Express. It's just on my laptop. It's just a developer's practice server here, and I'm going to connect to it. Right now, there are no databases on my server. And you can have many databases. So I'm going to click on New Query. And New Query is going to provide me a window with my SQL script that I can put in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my script that's provided by the author and copy and paste it. And it looks pretty good. There are a few problems, and one problem is that I don't have any databases. So you cannot create tables without databases. So I'm going to go ahead and issue the command to create the database and then to use that database. Here is the command, and you'll notice that SQL commands are going to terminate with a semicolon. Go does not terminate with a semicolon. It is a transact SQL. So what's going to happen is it's going to create the database first. Pause, let's say. Said, oh, now you want to use that one to create the tables. Not sure. Yeah, can't find the air company yet because the air company hasn't been created yet. But that's okay. It will execute. So right here, this green arrow will execute my script. And you'll see down here that it's saying it's adding the rows. That's what that means. And I'm going to come over to my Object Explorer. And this is where you see all your objects on your server. And one of the objects is a database object. Expand that. And there's my air company. And as I come and expand it more and more, very hierarchical, there are my 3 tables that the script created. And as I open up the table, I can go to the column, and there are my multiple columns that my script created. We will be learning how to do this in chapter 7 and 8. Go ahead and close out of this because what I want to show you is how to do this in Access. So let me open up Access. And I'm going to just create a blank database. This will be a little bit different. I'm not using the create database command here. Just creating it like that. And Access always wants to give me a table called table 1. I don't want it, so I'll just close that. And 2 things that we're going to use to create our script. Before I start on that, I don't know if you recall in chapter 1, we talked about 3 types of SQL. There's data definition language, abbreviated DDL. That's what I just did. It defines your tables and your other objects that you will have in your database. Then there's the data manipulation. Then there's the data manipulation language, DML. And this is the part, if you recall in chapter 1, when we said, what can we do with this data? And I think in your notes you said, well, you can add data, you can edit data, and you can delete data. That would be under data manipulation language. Thirdly, there's data control language, DCL, and that is how you're going to secure the objects, giving so-and-so rights to read the data perhaps, but not to add new data. So, or maybe giving a whole group of people no rights at all to read anything. So you get to decide who has the rights, and you're going to use DCL to do that. If you go to Create and Query Design, and I'm coming over here to SQL View, this is where you're going to write the scripts for DML. Now, right now, I'm talking about DDL, and the only way that I see to add the scripts to DDL is by creating some VBA script. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to go to Create, and we're coming over here to Module, and I'm now in a different window. See, I have two windows open. One is the IDE, one is the VBA editor. VBA is short for Visual Basic for Applications. And I'm going to go to Insert Procedure, and I'm going to write, you can call this anything. I'll call it Create Tables, because that's what we're doing. And I'm going to just come over and copy and paste that same script that I had in SQL Server Management Studio. Now that script was specifically designed for the syntax of SQL Server. And all this red that you see means that VBA does not like this script. So we're going to have to manipulate this a little bit to get it to work. First of all, when you're doing SQL, when you start a command with those two characters and end a line with those two characters, that means comments. Have you programmed before? Then you know that comments are ignored. So when this script executes, I wanted to ignore it, but the character for comments are different in VBA, and it's just the single quote. So if I got the single quote here, then and it turns green, and then it's happy, that's what VBA knows as a comment. Now, I've created the database already, but still I got to define a little bit about where I want this table to go. Remember in SQL Server Management Studio, maybe you don't, I wrote use Air Company. So here I'm going to declare an object variable. I'm going to call it DB, but that's a variable, so you can call it whatever you want to. And this object variable DB is going to be a database. And that is just how VB likes to declare variable with that weird word dim. Next, I'm going to assign to DB the current DB. Now, since I'm in Air Company, as you can see right here, then whenever I refer to DB in my source code, it means Air Company. To execute SQL in this VBA code, then we're going to run the execute method of the DB object. I don't know how much of that you understand. If you've done some object-oriented programming, maybe you do. And if you don't, just follow my directions here. So what I want to do is to get this whole statement on one line, and the end of your SQL statement is where you see the semicolon. Now notice again, no semicolons here, but the SQL will have a semicolon. So I'm just going to take a minute, bring all these up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so that entire SQL statement is on one line. And to execute this command, there's the DB object, there's the execute method, and the execute method will just require a string. So I'm going to convert this into a string literal by putting quotes around it. So there'll be one quote in the front, one quote in the back, and if there's any quotes in the middle, then something's wrong. Okay, and that's it. So every one of these is just an SQL statement to execute. So I'm going to copy and paste that in front of all of these, and I'll join you in a second. Okay, so we're happy here when they're all black. The red is gone, and I'm down to this line. It is red, and if you recall, well, that's a comment. So I'm going to put that in front of there, and I'm going to repeat this DB execute for the next create table. Again, I want to bring everything up to one line. you get that error, just ignore it. Okay. I'm going to keep pulling this up until I get the semicolon on this line, which just means that's the end. So let's put a quote there and a quote. And let's put our DB execute and the quote there. And it's nice and happy. And then I'm going to come through. All of these are already on one line, so just get that DB execute right in front of it. You see it? db.execute space quote here and then a quote at the end. And I'll finish this up and then we'll run it. All right, I've got them all done. There's no red. Now, if you're seeing some red, make sure there's only a quote at the beginning of the SQL string and at the end. You don't want two quotes in a row. See what will happen if I did that. So just double check that you don't have two quotes, but it's pretty straightforward. You just need to do that db.execute. Now, when you start the SQL, you'll be needing to know how to create these SQL statements. That's going to increase the complexity, but the SQL is written for you. So we're just kind of getting it set so that it can execute. Now that we've got this all done, we're going to hit that run button right there, and it's going to run our code. And I'm going to come over here to our Access IDE. Need to do a little refresh, and here we have our tables that we've created. I'm going to change this back to object type. For some reason, you might want to just close Access and reopen it. It doesn't refresh very easy. And there are the tables, the three tables we created with the data in there. Now, one other thing that I want you to do is I'm going to come over to the VBA code and hit that Save button. Now, this is the name for this module. You can have actually many sub-procedures in this modules and functions as you want. But this is my module for creating my DDL. So I'll give it BAS for basic, DDL for it's creating my DDL. That is an object you will also now see over here. There it is. And so if I close this out and wanted to come back to my source code, it's under modules. And a double click will open that source code back up. So I'll give you directions on what I want you to do, but I just want you to get that little experience in Access setting up your VBA to create some tables.